Hey, Margie here. Did you know that gluten and wheat can be destroying your bones? This is something very common, but many of us are not aware of this. So, in today's episode, we dive into this, really understanding what gluten is, how it affects our bones, and what can be done. And I'm really excited about our special guest is my husband, Dr. Craig Bissinger. And this is a topic that's near and dear to his heart because he has lived with gluten sensitivity for over 12 years. And the truth of the matter is, he wouldn't be alive today if he hadn't figured this out. So there's lots of good information that we share here, practical tips, and stay tuned. Welcome, Craig. Thank you so much for joining us. This topic is something that's near and dear to our hearts, and I think really can make a big difference for people. So I really appreciate you being here with me. Before we get started and really get into the details, I'd love you to share just the Cliff Note version of your story so people really see why we are so passionate about this topic. The full version, it was back in 2019. It was episode 17 on the many faces of autoimmunity. And I'll put that in the show notes if people really want to hear the much longer version of the story. But why don't you just share a little bit about it so everyone who hasn't heard yet
Sure.
understands, why we care so much.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me back on again, number one. And two, I am delighted to sit there and share an abridged version of my Odyssey because I've used that in my clinical practice to really make a difference in many people's lives in unexpected ways. And I hope some of you today will resonate with really the story I'm about to tell you and maybe see that there's things that you can do as well that will help you in your journey to better health. So let's go back here. And this goes back about 10 or 12 years ago. Um, and I started off by suddenly developing this strange, unusual cough after having antibiotics. It lasted for months. It was the point where I couldn't speak more than about 5 to 10 words before I'd cough. And obviously that was the trouble because I can't talk to patients. If we move forward on this, I started developing fevers up to 102 at nights. I was sweating through my sheets 4 times, like I'd had hot flashes on steroids. I was getting weaker. My blood count went down as low as 8.7, and it should be around 12. And my body was failing me. And I didn't even know what to do. And I did go to lots and lots of doctors, from infectious disease doctors, a rheumatologist, a cardiologist, a gastroenterologist, infectious disease doctors, all up and down, and not one person came up with a solution. And only Margie finally sat there and looked at me and says, if we don't do this, figure it out ourselves, no one's going to look for the answer for me, which was absolutely true. And it turned out to be gluten. And I stopped gluten, and all of the symptoms went away after 6 months. So it was remarkable for me then. And my weight came back. I'd lost 17 pounds as well. So I've been totally indebted to Margie for actually pushing me through this $25,000 worth of doctor tests, telling doctors that I thought may be gluten and being shunned because they didn't know the answers. And it only turned out to be gluten. So Margie, I think it's important for you to maybe give our audience a little idea of what is gluten and how does it actually affect our bones? Because that is what we want to talk about today.
Yeah, and before I go into this, I'm actually going to share some slides. And if if you're watching this, that's fine. You don't have to see the slides, but you can always go back to them. But the thing, I just want to also say one thing, that when the doctors, it's so frustrating when the doctors just say to you, I'm sorry, there's nothing that can be done. We never want to hear those words. And I was you dig deeper, you don't accept them. And so then I remember saying to you, well, everyone's given up on you, but I am not. And, a lot of times they don't appreciate gluten. So we had some extra blood sitting there. So that's when I said, let's get this test done and let's start seeing. So anyway, but I'm going to share, let me go into some details so you have a better understanding of what gluten is and why this can truly, it wasn't for you a bone situation, but it can wreak havoc on your bones and other parts of the body. So I'm just going to share my slides and just go through a few things. What is gluten? Gluten is a protein in wheat, barley, and rye. and it gives dough its elasticity and helps baked goods hold their shape. So that's what it's there for. The problem is it can trigger inflammation anywhere in the body. The symptoms of gluten, this is what's so crazy. People think, oh, if I have a gluten problem or a wheat problem, it's going to be my stomach. I'll have digestive issues, but it doesn't have to be. And it can be anywhere. It can be in your joints, skin, your brain, your bones. And the thing is, you can have, a lot of people think of an allergy where, if someone has a peanut allergy, you have this major, major reaction right away. But with food sensitivities, such as gluten, oftentimes it can even be 72 hours. You don't have to have symptoms right away. And so, if someone's eating this all the time and they're just feeling, it can be anything. It can be fatigue, brain fog. It can be anywhere in the body. And so, it's really hard to know if this is a problem or not. Here's how it affects our bones. So, number one, and I'm going to go into this in a few minutes in terms of like celiac disease, gluten sensitivity. But in celiac disease, you actually have damage to the intestines. And so, in the small intestine, where you're supposed to be absorbing your nutrients, so calcium, magnesium, vitamin D, they're not absorbed because you have this issue. So, one is just, damage to the intestines. Another thing, and we'll go into this in a little more detail, something called leaky gut, which is causes so gluten comes in and then the body starts attacking. And because it doesn't recognize the gluten, or what happened in Craig's case was it thinks it's something else. It thinks it's dangerous. And so the body just attacks itself. So it causes inflammation. The inflammation can break down anything in the body, but with bones, it causes an increase in osteoclast activity. That's bone breakdown cells. In celiac disease or other places, you just can get an attack directly on bone tissue. And there's even a word called osteoimmunology, where the bone and the immune system, they're working together. So there's major effects on bone. And the interesting thing is when I had my 4 summits, every single practitioner, when you would ask, what's one of the hidden root causes or what do you see? They all said gluten, gluten and wheat. This is a very, very big deal. So here's the thing. Every conventional doctor who deals with bone loss, deals with osteoporosis, will have people tested for celiac. This is a well-known. And what happens in celiac, if you look at the slide, for people seeing the slide, this is just showing the small intestine, and there's these finger-like projections that come up and they're called villi. And so that's where you absorb your nutrients through that. And what happens in celiac is they get flattened and damaged, so you're not getting absorption of the nutrients. So that's what happens in celiac, and that's appreciated. Almost all doctors who deal with people with osteoporosis will have people do a blood test for celiac. But the problem is that that's only a small part of the population. But so in celiac, as I said, the immune system is attacking the small intestine, causing damage to those villi. But it's only approximately like 1.4% of the population worldwide. So it's a very small percentage of people. But here's the crazy thing. 80% of people with celiac disease are undiagnosed. So even, besides being a small amount, even the people who have celiac are undiagnosed. So this is really important, especially in younger people. I mean, anybody with younger people who are getting different, they really should be checked for celiac, or anyone that has bone loss. I mean, I think, and I'll say that anyone with osteoporosis, osteopenia, any type of bone loss should have both a celiac test as well as other tests for gluten, which we'll go through. But anyway, that's celiac. But then what happens is there's something called non-celiac gluten sensitivity, or just gluten sensitivity, but that's not celiac. And what happens is something called leaky gut, which is increased permeability. I'm going to show you a picture in a minute, which is, so the lining of the small intestine is lined with cheesecloth. It's a barrier. And what happens, you can get holes in the cheesecloth, which is like increased permeability. So now there's holes that shouldn't be there. And the problem is pathogens, undigested food particles, and toxins can pass through this gut membrane that shouldn't, just like the gluten. Now the immune system sees these particles and they see them as foreign and causes inflammation. It just goes wild and starts attacking. And that's what causes the breakdown. And so what happens is there are these guards. They're called toll-like receptor 4. And they're like standing guards. And they're standing there, part of the innate immune system, and they're recognizing these harmful invaders. These are proteins. They're recognizing these harmful invaders, and they trigger the immune response to cause inflammation. But it can be anywhere in the body. That's the whole point. That can be so tricky. So this is just a picture of the leaky gut, and it's showing, we see those projections, as I talked about. And what happens when the permeability is there's something called tight junctions so that nothing can get in. But what happens is with intestinal permeability, wheat causes that. All wheat does. I mean, this is the crazy thing that there's a Professor Leonard and Maureen Leonard from Harvard, who did like, she looked at 60 different studies and she found that in everybody, wheat, when you ingest the wheat, that it does increase the permeability. So it does cause this leaky gut, but it heals. It's just transient until for some people it becomes not transient. But what happens is when there's, this leaky gut and as we talked about, the gluten comes in and then the body then now starts attacking. So that's what happened. That's what happened with Craig, is that he had, what we figured out is that he had a virus. He was living in labor and delivery as an OBGYN, and they were doing construction. So he probably got some virus that caused this cough, and they put him on one antibiotic, the next antibiotic, because the antibiotics, that's one of the ways that you can get this increased permeability as well. It does damage. And then the gluten came in and his body started attacking. It's called molecular mimicry. Anyway, so in terms of testing, so there's blood tests for celiac. My favorite test is the Wheat Zoomer by Vibrant America. And you can just go to their website and see, where it is or how you can order it. Most functional medicine practitioners will be able to order that for you. So that's the very best test. That will tell you about intestinal permeability. It shows you all the different possibilities if you have issues with wheat, if you have issues with any of the different proteins in gluten. So that's my absolute favorite. There are, though, gluten sensitivity panels. That's what we did. We tested with Craig at the time. So LabCorp, Quest. And what they do is they test for antibodies to gluten, and it can be, and so he had the IgG, but it can be, there's various different ones, but that may or may not be positive. It's not always positive. With Craig, it was. So the better test is the Wheat Zoomer, if you can get that. But if you can't get a test, then the other thing is just to do an elimination diet. And we'll talk about this, but you have to take gluten out of your diet for 3 to 4 weeks and really see how you feel. And we'll talk about it in a minute because you have to take it completely out of your diet. So anyway, that's a basic, quick information on gluten. I think everybody needs to be tested, though, because this is so prevalent. And especially, it's interesting, in celiac disease, for every one person who has digestive issues, 8 don't. So, we don't know. Craig didn't have any issues whatsoever. So anyway, okay, that's my basic information on gluten. I'm gonna go back to you, Craig.
So, Margie, being gluten-free is just something that requires some education. And I know when I first started going gluten-free, I tended to sit there and think I could eat less gluten and probably do okay. But turns out, I guess a lot of people like myself, you can't get away with doing it's an all or none event. So either it's you eat gluten or you don't. And why is that? Can you tell us?
It's very different. It's not like sugar where you can cut back and you'll feel much better. What happens, I showed you those toll-like receptor 4s, and they're sort of like the guards, they're on the surface of the immune system and they're your first line of defense. But here is the issue. To activate those guards, for them to start going crazy and cause the immune system to go crazy, all it takes is a nanogram of gluten. And what is that? That's a billionth of a gram. Yeah, a billionth of a gram. So it's such a small amount. So that's why I learned this from Dr. Tom O'Brien. He's someone who has taught me so much about gluten. But he used to say, you can't be a little bit gluten-free, just like you can't be a little bit pregnant. And it's so true. So it really is an all or nothing thing. And that's what it makes it so harder. People think, oh, I'll just cut back. And they don't notice any difference because it just takes a little bit to start activating the whole inflammatory cascade. So anyway, yeah, that's the reason. And so you have to just be really careful. And that's when, exactly.
Margie, can we trust restaurants that say they have gluten-free food?
Unfortunately, we have to really look at this seriously because there was a study done at Columbia University, published in 2019 in the Journal of Gastroenterology. And what they did, they analyzed data that they collected over 18 months. It was from 804 individuals across the country. And what they had a portable gluten detection device. So they went to places that had gluten-free menus. And when the waiters weren't there, they tested the food. And this, and basically went to different places. And so all in all, they tested a lot of items, 5,624. And this was so sad. They found that 32% of the restaurant dishes labeled as gluten-free tested positive for gluten. And that the gluten, this is the worst part, and I know you can attest to this. Gluten was detected in 53% of gluten-free pizzas and 51 of gluten-free pastas. How sad is that? But we want to just so the thing is, yeah, you have to be careful and you can't always trust them. I know it was interesting because when I read the study, I know those were the two areas, am I right, that you had issues with in the past?
Well, I think you're right. And I've had a lot of experiences now on how to kind of grapple with going out of the house, going to neighbors, and even shopping. And I want to at least take a couple minutes, if I may, just to kind of go through some of those experiences, just so you're aware that there's minefields in just about everything you do, and you have to be very, very self-promoting and be a detective all the time. So the first thing I will say to you is that there's gluten in lots of things, and you first have to do is always have to look on labels. That's number one. Number two, there's a lot of cross-contamination. And if you go to certain stores that have fresh nuts and even some fruits, if you look on the side of the label, it says maybe processing wheat on the same machinery, in essence, or in the same facility, airborne, or even on the same equipment. So even chocolates, most chocolates, to my dismay, basically warn you as well. So you cannot really take that chance if you really have a gluten-free lifestyle that you have to go with. So I wanted to at least tell you about a few of those items I know that are challenging. Soy, it's definitely got wheat, so you have to be careful about that. I had a nice argument with a waiter one day about blue cheese because some blue cheeses are and some aren't. Evidently, some blue cheeses are made based upon the mold lives on bread. And so that's another simple thing. The word naturally gluten-free, which you may see on menus, I believe, Margie, isn't that like, what's the percentage? Like 97% gluten-free is what they say?
Yeah, or they just, they don't really see that much of it, so we don't know exactly, but we're careful on that as well.
Correct.
Hey, Margie here. High quality supplements are a big part of a comprehensive osteoporosis program. To help you, I offer a significant discount every day in my supplement store through FullScript. FullScript has the most extensive catalog of professional grade supplements and wellness products I've ever found. So So all you need to do is go to tinyurl.com. That's tinyurl.com/supplements for less. And you'll get to my full script store. And in there, you'll see my favorite bone building supplements. So make sure to check it out. And the link will also be in the show notes. So let's get back to the show.
And then we go to things that sort of caught me off guard. I was at a holiday party, and Italian is, I like to try it, and I was so excited. They had gluten-free pasta on the menu, and sure enough, I took the gluten-free pasta. I got sick for a month after that, and we finally kind of deduced that a lot of restaurants will boil the pasta in hot water, and then they'll take the pasta out and use the same water again for the next one and the next one and the next one. So that was a cross-contamination event. And honestly, it was not fun to relive some of those symptoms for up to a month because I am ultra sensitive. Also, sometimes they'll bread food, even though you have asked not to have breading. They don't understand that breading is not the same. They don't see that being wheat. So you have to be careful, and I got sick a second time from that. Pizza dough, when you go to a pizzeria, they really can't change their hands and clean it up well enough and put it into different spaces for me to be satisfied. And then you go to deep fat fryers, McDonald's, anything they fry, they're breaded stuff. You can't have French fries. I mean, I know that sounds terrible, but what's nice to have a French fry.
Well, wait, let's stop on that. So basically, with the French fries, some restaurants do have two different fryers. So you just have to ask, is this, because they'll say they're gluten-free, and then you have to ask, is this fryer the same fryer that you use? Oh, yes, it's the same. But some restaurants will say, oh, no, we keep things completely separate. And things have gotten so much better. It's really, I think this is becoming much more, people are really getting more educated.
I found that to be true, but there's some other circumstances where we've been very specific in our request. And I don't think everyone you talk to, every waiter actually understands what you're asking every place and every time. And I have a very, good example. I have gone to the same restaurant multiple times, had the same chicken dish with a sauce on it, never had a problem. One day they come and I tell the waiter, please check with the chef to make sure there's no gluten in the food. So he comes out with my dish. This time he's got gluten-free pasta as a base. Never before. He explains to me that it's gluten-free. He's sure of that, and that it was a new way they're doing the dish. I looked at him. I said, send it back, show it to the chef, and then come back and talk to me. And he came back out and he apologized. He said, oh, I'm so sorry. The pasta's gluten-free, but the chef had not seen that was the gluten-free issues, and the sauce had wheat in it. So you can get ambushed even when you try. So I think that's really important to understand. And the last little example in that was that my sister had me entertain me in Ohio, and she was so proud that she found somebody who could make me a gluten-free carrot cake. So I'm really excited. And I'm taking these tiny, tiny slices of taste because I wanted to savor a taste of a cake I just hadn't had in a while. And then Margie comes by and she looks out on the outside of it. And what does it say? It says spelt?
No, I said, I said, oh, what is this? I see him eating carrot cake. I'm thinking, what's this? And my sister-in-law is like, oh, it's spelt. They said that's gluten-free. And I'm thinking, oh, no, spelt is not gluten-free at all.
And the reason my sister was very upset because she didn't want to hurt me. So she went back and confronted the woman who basically said, well, I'm gluten-free and I can eat it. So suddenly you're kind of realizing that the vocabulary of what it means is different for different people. And we went away to Europe one time, and I actually went to the Celiac Society to get the explanation of my problem in Italian, and I think in, I don't know, Czech or something, or German, because we went to two different places, and I'd hand it to the people there. In the Czech Republic, they could care less about anything. They were kind of tough. But in Italy, they smiled, nodding, and it turns out in Italy, all the kids in kindergarten get screened for gluten. So they have a big issue there, and they were amazing when we went to Italy. The best place ever, even with their pasta, it was yummy. But nevertheless, Margie did mention that there isn't some antidotes and prevention. So if in fact I go anywhere, I take with me this stuff called Glutenza, and I'm telling you, I take two of these within 90 minutes of eating the meal or beforehand, and it helps me. I do that all the time.
I just want to say something about that for a second. So what it's an enzyme that blocks 98% of the gluten. It also blocks some other things too. It's a digestive enzyme. So it's like an insurance policy for us. Since we don't know, we don't take it at home. But when we go out and you're just not sure, it gives you that little extra bit by reducing 98% of the gluten. So we haven't really, the truth is, we haven't had any problems, knock on wood. We've, so we take this, and you really only need to take one of them in terms of, but anyway, so we just bring it everywhere. It's not a big deal, and it's like a digestive enzyme. This will be in the show notes, Glutenza. You can get it on Fullscript at a discount, and it's just a great thing to have. And not all of them work right away. And so this one you take before the meal, and it lasts like 90 minutes. So it's very, very effective. So that's our prevention. That's number one. While I tell the story of the second one. The second one was, when this had happened, when he had been inadvertently exposed to gluten, it took like a month or even longer to get better. And so, one of my gurus who's been on my summits and is Dr. Tom O'Brien. And I had said to him, is there any kind of, what do you do? Is there any kind of antidote? And he said, yes. He gave me three things. He said, number one, very high dose vitamin D, like 50,000, IUs of vitamin D. That's number one. Number two, the bovine colostrum. And he said, bovine colostrum, and, you take that. And that also is a good thing just for leaky gut. It helps heal because newborns, their tight junctions are not. They have intestinal permeability. So the colostrum is what heals that. So he's like, the bovine colostrum. And then the third thing we've never done, the third part was low dose naltrexone. We've never had to use that. So the first time, so I was bringing that everywhere. The colostrum, I would bring, whenever we traveled, we would just bring it so we never would have the problem. And the first time, took a month to heal. So the first time was in Ohio, and my sister-in-law, thought she was doing a nice thing with that carrot cake. I'm like, all right, we have our antidote. Let's try it. And guess what? The next day, he was totally fine. Not one bit of a problem. And since then, there have been a few times you've had incidents, and this has really, really worked. So I'll put that in the show notes as well, those two, but they really help. They're like fantastic. So anyway, I'm very grateful for Dr. Tom for that. And yeah, and it's real. And the truth is you can do this. And so many, so many people in the community have issues with gluten. And when they stop, that's the most amazing thing. I know several people have told me, oh gosh, their bone density increases, number one. Number two, their eczema goes away. Their arthritis, all of a sudden they don't have their arthritis symptoms. So it's truly remarkable. And Craig, what I love about you is that, you had this issue. And, you were unbelievable. I don't know how you went to work every day, barely able to talk, but somehow you're just not a person that complains. You did it. But what's the incredible part is that after the fact, you really have paid it forward. Do you want to share some of your I told you just keep a journal of this because, how you have helped others with this gluten. So why don't you share a few of your really interesting, there's so many, but just share like a few of your stories.
Well, the first thing I do want to say is when you talk to patients, you start to hear their stories. And the first thing that always piques my interest is when people have autoimmune-based conditions, fibromyalgia, lupus, arthritis conditions, psoriatic arthritis, this Crohn's, and all kinds of things. And sometimes they don't really know what's going on. And so we start into these conversations, and gluten becomes part of that conversation. So the first thing I want to say is by encouraging patients to seek out their own solutions, eliminations, as Margie had mentioned, has been part of what I've done. And I've written myself little notes on the charts of these patients to follow up in the future. And what I found is they're better. Their arthritis is better. Whatever their problems were are reduced. And not just the GI issues, the bloating is better. And it's not just them. Their kids and even their spouses, other people in their communities seem to have listened to them and have seen improvements as well. A couple of stunning ones, I would say. In one way, I had a younger male, he was about 15 at the time, and I'd known his mom for a very long time. And he was his whole life had changed suddenly, and no one knew what was going on. He just didn't feel well. He was lethargic, fatigued. He didn't feel well. He was just changed character. And that had been going on for a while, lots of workups. And I basically had a conversation with her. I introduced her to Autoimmunity, a book by Tom O'Brien. So they started reading it, and we talked about the gluten. And they made a total metamorphosis of his life and his food and gluten. And he's 25 now, and he's had since we started on this, he got better. It wasn't just a little better, it's like better, amazing. And recently I had a patient who comes in with her husband, which is kind of a stunning little dumb story, but cute. And she comes in, and he comes with her gynecology exam, which that's a nice thing. And she says, Dr. Bissinger, but last year you told me to go off gluten. I go, yeah. She said, I have coughed for the last 25 years, and no one has told me how. I didn't know why. I couldn't stop it. After 2 weeks of going gluten-free, my cough went away, and it has never, ever come back. Then her husband chirps, and he says, Dr. Bissinger, I can finally sleep at night, and I pray to you every night because you saved me. So there is something powerful when you pay it forward. And again, I just want to encourage you to have the courage to pursue your own health and be your own advocate. And as a doctor, I've seen it now that when we don't know an answer, we turn our backs. And even when I had my worst days, I went to these super specialists, and I'd say, do you think I have a gluten problem? And they'd look at me and they'd say, I have no idea what gluten is. And that was the end. This shut me down, shut me out. But I'm back. I'm fine. I'm wonderful. And I share forward this. And I'm glad that Margie invited me back on the show, because I hope that maybe some of you will be able to transform your own lives and those of those you love by just asking some simple questions. So, Margie, would you like to add anything
I
to
want
that?
to say a few things. We're talking about gluten because that's such a big, and also wheat. It's not just, it's also people have issues with wheat too. So when you get these tests, you'll find out gluten, wheat, what's going on. But also people can have that just happens to be a very, very prevalent one with bone health and osteoporosis. And as I said, every practitioner in the summit, we see this. I've been doing this for over 25 years. When people get tested, we see this, and they may not even realize, but all of a sudden, wow, do they feel better? So I just think everybody should, if they can, get tested. As I said, there's the wheat zoomer, which is really the best test because it's not just celiac. And that's what I don't know why, I've asked sometimes at meetings when they talk about celiac disease and, as being a gluten, one of the problems with osteoporosis. So what about non-celiac gluten sensitivity? They don't pay that much attention to it. I think it's becoming more and more, but it's so, so important and so debilitating, and how sad to be losing bone. And it's so much easier now to deal with. And what we have in the show notes is I put together like where gluten's hidden. So that's just a free PDF. You can just download it and use that to just make sure. And it's, I don't eat gluten myself. I don't have the same issues with Craig, but it's funny because I stopped eating gluten completely with you. And now if I eat it, I just don't feel well. So I've gone gluten-free, myself. And it's totally doable. It really is. But It's amazing, right? These stories, because he only sees people once a year. That's the interesting thing. Sometimes you just see, right, gynecology patients once a year. And you've had people with brain fog go away. I mean, it's just really incredible. And I've had so many people in the community. So it's just something I wanted to bring to your attention because I don't want anyone suffering needlessly from this, but also you can also have other food sensitivities. You could have dairy, you could have soy, there are other ones also, and there are other food zoomers that are available. So if you're still having issues and it's not gluten, there are other ones you can get tested as well. But anyway, I just wanted to bring this back because I said it was 2019, and a lot of people, a lot of you who are listening to my podcast now didn't listen back then. And I just hear this too often. People really don't understand it. And oh, I don't have celiac, or they didn't check for more. So hope this was helpful. And let us know if we love hearing, I don't want anyone to be feeling badly, but if something gets better, that's the crazy thing, right? When eczema gets better and all of a sudden brain fog and fatigue, it's really quite amazing what could happen. So anyway, thank you, Craig, for sharing this. And anything else you want to say before we end?
No, but I had a lovely time having a chance to speak to all of you out there in podcast world, and I honestly, I thank Margie every day for keeping me around, literally, and from my gluten thing, because it was a bad thing, and there wasn't, it sounds melodramatic, but my body was failing. But again, I was taking something that was poisoning me.
The truth was, I'm just a really positive person. So there was no question that we weren't going to get better. I wasn't going to take that as an answer. And so that just thought never really occurred to me. Like, yes, we're going to deal with this somehow. And then on your 60th birthday, you said, I don't want to cry. You said to me, thank you for saving my life. I didn't think I'd make it to my 60th birthday. And that really hit me because that just never entered my head. It just was never something that I ever thought about but anyway, this that could be that dire. That's the problem when your body goes crazy with inflammation. So I'm so grateful that that we figured this out, and grateful that we can pass this on to others, and hopefully nobody has to suffer like you did or like people do or lose bone unnecessarily. And that's the reason that I asked you back and we're sharing this information. So thanks so much, everybody, for being here. And I always appreciate everyone listening. Please share this with anybody that you think could benefit. And, also, I really also appreciate it if you subscribe, if you liked the episode, because this way it spreads it to more people. More people get to hear about, about this podcast and get to hear about all this information. So thanks again. And I look forward to seeing you on the next episode.